Hi, welcome to the Also Called podcast, where we're asking hard questions about our place in this hectic world.
Join us as we dig into the truth about who God is, possibly discovering that we are also called.
Welcome to the Also Called podcast. In today's episode, we'll meet two writers from our soon-to-be-released book, The Other Disciples. Today, we're diving into the life-changing story of Daughter, or the woman with the issue of blood, the third disciple from the book, written by Stephanie Williams, and Joanna Chuza, our fourth, written by Anita Smith.
Join us as we discover who they were, their remarkable experiences, Daughter's more than she could have asked for healing, and Joanna's grateful response to her own. We'll explore the lessons from their lives, ministries, and deep love for Jesus, and consider what their stories offer us today. So get ready for the journey into the heart of a faithful and devoted follower. Let's get started.
Today, we're talking about what we learned from our conversations with the authors, and we wanted to share the highlights right from the authors' mouths. In this episode, we're diving into the identity restoring story of Daughter, the third disciple from the upcoming book written by Stephanie Williams and Mia Burke.
Today, we have Stephanie Williams with us, and she's going to introduce us to Daughter. She is who we're referring to as the woman with the issue of blood. So, Stephanie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, like Mia said, my name is Stephanie Williams. I am a third culture kid. I grew up with an American dad and a German mom and in a military family, traveling all over the world and having to adjust and adapt to all kinds of life situations and all different ways of living. And then I came to know the Lord when I was in college, and that just changed everything completely for me. I went from following one faith to following Jesus, and my life has never been the same.
So, Stephanie, can you tell us a little bit about who we're talking about today?
So, Daughter is one of my favorite biblical characters because she is so unknown. She's only known by the term daughter, and she has a very chronic issue. You can find her in Matthew 9:20 through 22, Mark chapter 5, verses 25 through 34, and again in Luke chapter 8, verses 43 through 48.
I love that you said that you changed from faith to following Jesus. I think a lot of us can get stuck in a certain belief or traditions, things like that. But there's a definite difference when you're just following Jesus.
So, what specifically drew you to Daughter in particular?
I think really it was, again, the journey of her battling with this chronic, very long 12-year battle with her health issues, and me going through my own journey of a chronic long-term illness that has yet to be identified and have all kinds of medical professionals. The list of doctors is ridiculous, and they've yet to be able to tell me, here's what you've got, this is what's going on, and here's how we're moving forward and treating it. And so when in scripture it talks about her expending her life's resources and never getting any answers, my heart just broke for her because it's just so much a part of my own personal journey.
I can relate to that too. I think that's something that the three of us have in common is this journey of trying to figure out what is going on and not being able to get answers and just getting more frustrated, and learning that the things that we put in our body and our emotional health and regulating our nervous system, it's all connected because God is wonderful and he designed us that way. Tell us about the fictional story for this chapter.
So we ended up going with a fictional story about a girl who's in the foster care system and about to age out, feeling very hopeless. And I think we went with that because people in general who are in health situations can really at some points of their journey feel hopeless. And so we just went through with that story a situation of a girl not wanting to open up one more time and be disappointed one more time. And I think even though it didn't address her health, it still addresses the whole idea of just opening yourself up one more time. Maybe this is the time something good will happen. It was a hard one to write as far as like our hearts, because again, in situations when all things seem hopeless, scraping up that faith, scraping up that hope one more time. So, Stephanie, so let's talk a little bit about the cultural historical context. What was the world that daughter was living in?
Yeah. So, early Israel, Jesus was in the midst of his ministry, traveling through Israel. The word was getting out. Back up 12 years before that, he wasn't known yet. She was young. She was coming into her womanhood, which should have been a good thing, but then it didn't do its normal cycle of the way it should be. And so we speculate. We don't know for sure exactly what her issue was, but at the times that she was living in were very archaic, for lack of a better word. You really have to take yourself out of Western civilization and Western culture and what we know, and really transport back into the Eastern world. And there were no hospitals, there were no doctors, they didn't really know how things worked. It was just very simplistic in so many ways. So starting her journey as a woman, we believe that the bleeding, the hemorrhaging issue had to do with her menstrual cycle. It could have been other things, but that seems to be the most logical. And in the Jewish culture, if you had any type of bleeding disorder, any type of skin issue, anything medical, it rendered you culturally and spiritually unclean during the time that you were going through it. And it wasn't until you were deemed clean again, either through the hemorrhaging stopping or the illness being cured or whatever it was, that being proven, that you were then allowed to re-enter into the culture and into the society and go back to synagogue, to their church. And until that was proven, you were an outcast. And anybody who came in contact with you ran the risk of being shunned also by society. And so your family, you really were just cut off from everybody that you knew. And it was proven that it had ceased or that it continued by going the priests, which were all men. It was very male dominated society back then. The priests were men, physicians were men, everybody was men. The only women you might encounter were the midwives that were delivering the babies. And it's possible that it could have been a midwife that would go in with the priest and to prove that everything had stopped and the woman was clean again, her cycle had stopped, and she was able to then go through the cleansing ritual that what needed to happen to enter back into society. But there was definite almost shame that came with it, which is really sad, because being a mother and childbirth and from our Western culture, it's a beautiful thing. It's something that we celebrate. And it was celebrated back then too, but it was the month to month stuff that was shameful and rendered you unable to be with the rest of your population and the rest of your people.
Are there some other issues that, Stephanie, that you would like to cover that she dealt with?
As with many things, Satan can take something that God means for good and completely distort it and blow it out of proportion to then become something negative and bad. And back then, if you had something, especially like a bleeding issue, the mentality was, well, if it hasn't stopped, what have you done wrong? What sin have you done? What's occurred into your life? What are you not confessing? What are you not getting out? And so it became, you were being accused of stuff that you were like, I haven't done anything. I haven't done anything wrong, And so there was, they even say it. There's the story of the young man who was blind. Yes. And they were blaming it on his parents' sin, that, well, what did you do? Well, why aren't you getting better? And that was just kind of the mentality of the culture, is that there had to be something more wrong with you. It couldn't just be a biological thing. And then to the point where nobody was going to get near enough to you to listen anyway. It's not like we had telephones or technology that, you could still be in community, like what you were mentioning with COVID. COVID was terrible during the pandemic, but we at least had technology that we could stay in community with. I remember when I was younger, oh gosh, I was in early 20s, I think. I worked at a child development center, And everything that they got, I got. Because they quarantined them, the little ones, from the population to keep it from spreading, just like what God did with the Israelites. We're going to quarantine you, we're going to set you apart. But they quarantined those little precious babies in my office until their mom and daddy could come. And so you name it, I got it. The only thing I never got was the lice. I never got lice, but I got scabies and Fifth's disease and scarlet fever and all of that kind of stuff. And so I got scarlet fever and Fifth's disease, which are early childhood diseases. And you literally are quarantined. And I remember my mom showing up to my apartment, and God love her sweet little German self. She had on a bandana around her neck and yellow gloves, dishwashing gloves up to her elbows, and her pants tucked in her boots. And, she was like covered head to toe, short of a hazmat suit. And she put a basket of food in front of my door, and she knocked on the door, and then she backed way up into it and right in front of my neighbor across the hall. And I stayed back, and thank you, Mom. I love you. And thank you for the food, because I couldn't go out. I didn't have any food in the house. I was running it. So everything that Andrea just said, how do you care for yourself on a practical level? Unless you have people, and that's the kind of the silver lining, unless you have people in your life that love you enough to step out just a little bit. I mean, like right on the line of what's spiritually allowed, what's culturally allowed, enough to kind of push you a basket of food and then run the other direction. And again, another one of those touch points that my heart just broke for daughter, because how do you care for yourself if you don't have anybody to care for you in just those simple, practical ways?
Exactly. And there wasn't anything. I mean, she had, like it said in the word, she exhausted her resources. I don't know if that meant just financially, but it might have exhausted the family members and friends who were willing to help her. It might have been,
Relational.
yes, exactly. So much more than that.
Can you kind of summarize this story on how we get her name, daughter, and exactly how Jesus brought that hope to her?
So she snuck out, basically. She snuck out, and she snuck through the crowd. And she knew. So in the Jewish tradition, they had very specific articles of clothing that they wore. Part of the clothing that Jesus would have had on was something called talid, and the corners of his robe had knots on them. And the belief was that in touching, that there was power of healing and connection, just the hem of his garment. And that's what she went into this with. She came out of hiding, came out of isolation, wandered through the crowds, which there were hordes of people. So she was touching people. I can only imagine that maybe she had covered herself to disguise herself in some way. I don't know that for sure, but I'm guessing, because otherwise I think people would have just like parting of the Red Seas, and she's got the plague and she's in the middle of us. So her hope was, if I can just get close enough to him and touch the corner of his garment, then maybe I have hope to be healed. And that's exactly what happened. And that's exactly what she did. Did she graze it? Did she grasp it? Did she touch it? We don't know. Personally, I think she just soft graze, but it was enough that Jesus went, oh, hold on, because he felt the power go out of him. Hold on, who just touched me? To when his disciples, that were his posse that was traveling with him, his disciples all said, what do you mean, who's touched you? There's people all around you. That's how we know this was a very crowded marketplace. There were people everywhere. What do you mean, who just touched you? You probably were just touched by a horde of people. And he said, no, somebody just touched me. And then he knew he's God. He's fully human and he's fully God. And so then he turned around, and of course, then she confessed. That is when we hear him say, daughter. And when she's given a name for the first time in her whole story, and she's given the name because she stepped out in faith. She stepped out bravely against all odds, and she trusted, and she had hope. And in that fast, in that instant, daughter, you have been healed.
The beautiful thing is, we don't know if she was Jewish or not Jewish, So if she was, she might have known Malachi 4:2 that talks about the sons of righteousness with healing in his wings, because the talit was like a shawl that had the tassels. And
Mhm.
so did she grab on to that prophetic understanding of what the Messiah was going to be able to do? Or maybe she wasn't Jewish. We don't 100% know, but we think that she was because he referenced her as daughter. Because if you want to kind of go back and argue, there's that he said, I'm not here for people outside of the family or for the Gentiles. I'm here for the Jews, even though he did do some healing for another person who wasn't Jewish. And the second thing that was so beautiful that Stephanie and I talk about in the chapter is the fact that he didn't just restore her health, he restored her identity. He restored her spiritually, he has restored her physically, he restored her mentally. And that's what's so beautiful about this healing is that publicly he calls her out. And you could read it from the perspective that he wasn't calling her out to reprimand her. He was calling her out to stay right now. You are reestablished as a daughter of Israel. You're reestablished as a daughter in your family and the daughter of God. So I think what he did for her was so much more than a healing.
Yeah, and to do it publicly, but also her point of boldness or desperation or both for her to be able to step out and do that and to say, yeah, it was me, I did it.
I know. I mean, can you imagine? I try to put, when I'm reading through scripture, I try to put myself, as hard as it is, into the story. I just don't even know that I would have that kind of courage, but I might, because she was desperate. I mean, desperate beyond measure.
And I also wonder if there was another part to it is with him addressing her as daughter, it was addressing her identity. But did she have to work through anger and resentment towards the people who were so unkind to her and so unempathetic with her plight? Did she have to keep going back to, oh, yeah, I'm daughter? I don't have to get angry. I don't have to be bitter. I don't have to. I have my new identity. I can move forward. So I wonder if that was a challenge for her too.
See, I think that's one of those things. Sometimes God, that ain't me, that ain't my story. But sometimes God does this miraculous healing, like he did for her with her physical healing. But because it was instantaneous, maybe he healed all of that emotional and mental at the same time. So she was only filled with gratitude and love. But for most people who come to know Christ, that's not our story. We do have to keep reminding ourselves of that. We do have to keep going back. I am a daughter. God is good. God is good at being God. He is good to me. He wants to give me good things. But we have to keep going back to those things because we get in those ruminations or we get stuck. And sometimes we have to, because of the relationships that we have to learn those boundaries because sometimes we have to keep going back to be able to have somewhat of a relationship. So we have to learn that too with other people and with our jobs and with ourselves. Sometimes we don't know how to say no to others. We just keep abandoning ourselves trying to do for other people. So maybe she did get that miraculous healing, but for a lot of people, we have to keep working. We have to keep working at it and keep going back and reaching for that garment.
One of the things that came to mind when I was writing my piece of this chapter was there was another healing that happened. It was the man at the pool of Bethesda. And Jesus asked him, do you want to be healed? He didn't ask that of daughter. And I just wonder if it's because that man was sitting, his identity was sitting in being sick, in being unhealed, in being a beggar, all that went into what it meant for somebody during that period to be sickly or to be unclean or to be an outcast. She didn't have any of that. She was, boom, I got my identity, I'm out of here. So I just wonder, speculation, maybe she was healed completely and didn't have to work through that, where Jesus knew that it was going to be a little bit more work for the man at the pool of Bethesda.
So, Stephanie, tell us how we can apply this today and what do you want our listeners to walk away from this conversation with?
My hope and prayer is that whoever's watching this will actually go back and if you haven't already, read the chapter that we've written, but then even read more about her story and really dig deep into this before you jump all the way to application. We've just kind of touched real briefly on her culture and society and what was happening in her world. But there's more. Go read it. Go read the chapter if you haven't already. The application: don't give up hope. Hold on to God's sovereignty. He knows. He knows every hair on our head. He knows every hair that's gone down the drain, and I've had a lot of them. He knows every hurt, be it physical, emotional, mental. He knows all of it. And it can be easy to fall into a place of, well, if he knows, then why doesn't he fix it? I've certainly been in that place in my life on a number of occasions. But sometimes the greatest act of love that we can give for somebody or to somebody is to not fix it. I just had this conversation with my granddaughter the other day about productive struggle. And what does productive struggle mean? And I pointed it back to the butterfly. She was learning about butterflies in science class, and how if you go and you try to cut a butterfly out of its cocoon too soon because you're watching it wiggle and struggle and be in pain, and after being closed up and alone in this cocoon, if you cut them out too soon, they won't survive because they haven't gone through the productive struggle that needs to happen in order for their body to be formulated, their wings to be strengthened, all of those things. And so I guess what I would want the listeners and people to really look at in this is, what is your productive struggle that you're going through? If you've been drawn to this chapter, the chances are there's a reason that you have been drawn to it. And so to look at your productive struggle, and even though your hope and your wish is that somebody would come along and rescue from it, that God would come along and rescue you from it, his timing is perfect. It may never happen this side of heaven. Your healing may only come once you come to know Christ as your Savior, if you don't know him already. Once you put your belief and your hope in Jesus. And then in that, when God calls you home and you spend eternity with him, there comes your healing.
As we continue, let's examine the highlights of our interview with Anita Smith on the effects of Jesus' interaction with Joanna Chuza, the fourth disciple, from our upcoming book written by Anita Smith. Today we have Anita Smith joining us, and we're really excited about it. So Anita, can you introduce yourself?
My name is Anita Smith. I'm from Oklahoma. I went to Stillwater, Oklahoma State University, got a degree in French, got married, had some children, moved around the world. I worked in education for many years, met Mia, became lifetime friends with her, moved around the world a little bit more. I discovered I had a niche in accounting and auditing as something. It was interesting because it works in facts. I'm pretty straightforward when it comes to facts, and right now I spend most of my time reviewing facts and writing reports on it. That's me right now.
Awesome. Thank you.
Anita, for our listeners, whether they're new believers or just not familiar with Joanna, can you give us some background on her?
Well, first I'll say there's not a lot of background on her. She's mentioned in two places. It's kind of interesting that she's only mentioned in two places because it seems like the fact that she's named in those two places in Luke, that there's something more to her. There's something very significant about her. She was a disciple in name and in service.
What did you most enjoy about writing her, or what did you most relate to about her?
And she was kind of in the background. That's what I liked about her. I'm a background kind of person, and to be able to provide and not necessarily be doing it because I want people to see me, but because it benefits someone else.
I am the same way. I'm more of a background kind of person. So
Yeah.
I can relate.
If I could have it, if I could be in the dark right now, just like you could just see my eye.
So diving into Joanna, what's some of the cultural historical context we might need to understand about the life that she was living, the time she was living, that goes into what she does and how Jesus interacts with her?
So King Herod was in power, and Joanna was part of King Herod's household. He was the king of the Jews, and I think Jesus threatened his kingdom and what his overall power was going to be. So to threaten Jesus' life and anybody who was part of that circle was kind of a risk for Joanna. Joanna's husband was a household manager, so she had a unique position in the household to be able to be aware of different things going on. She would be aware of the tensions of King Herod, maybe feeling some type of way about Jesus and his community and the things that Jesus was doing and disrupting or fracturing Herod's power.
Yeah, I imagine that put her in a very precarious position with seeing both sides being drawn into this ministry. I imagine that was very hard. So, what do you want to tell our listeners about the issue that she faced?
Not much is known specifically about what Joanna's issue really was. It could be that she was suffering from an illness, or a member was suffering from an illness, or there was something just infecting her spirit that she needed healing from. In Luke, it mentions that her and other women were cured. And so we can kind of infer that she was healed from that. She saw relief, she saw purpose, she received gratitude, and in that gratitude, I think she translated that into find a purpose, to have a renewed spirit, and to give to Jesus ministry.
I love that in that when we were going through that for your chapter, we literally had to get into the grammar because she's put with Susanna, Mary Magdalene, and others. And so we
Yes.
literally had to get in, where's the comma? Is there a colon there? Was she sick? Was someone in her family sick? And it even brings up set free from demons. So it's a
Right.
very difficult passage to really pick apart, but it was a lot of fun to do that with you and try to look at where was she coming from when she met Jesus.
I just want to say that more often than we realize, our physical healing is attached to our mental and spiritual. From personal experience, just over a year ago, I was having a conversation with a woman at church, and I had said to her, if Christians were being persecuted in the United States, I don't know that I would be found guilty of being a Christian. Here I am a year later, and just looking back over the growth, the spiritual growth and healing that has happened, but also physically, a lot of the physical ailments that I was struggling with so
Yes.
much are not there anymore, or they're a lot less. And so also, being a massage therapist, I am very much of the belief that it's all connected. And I listen to, different podcasts. Trauma Rewired is one of the ones that I listen to a lot. And that's where I plan to do some of my own study, is through neurology and somatics. But being in relationship with Jesus, bringing those things to him when we don't have a direction and we're trying to fix things on our own,
Yes.
it affects us so much physically. You're battling against something that you can't see, and it has a physical effect. And the
Yes.
more you take the time to pay attention to what your body is feeling, instead of just shoving it down to keep doing the thing, keep going after the goal, or not wanting to offend these people, or I have these responsibilities, the more we keep pushing, we turn off the signals our body is telling us. And so when we take the time just to slow down and be in our body, commune with God, to ask him what he's trying to reveal to us, I mean, so many changes can happen.
I would even agree with you, because even as I was thinking about this story and I wrote and I had to apply it to my own personal story, I kept thinking, how did I feel while I was going through the mess I was going through? And I was trying to just carry the burden, carry the pain, not share any of it, and just be silent about what was going on with me personally. And, my marriage was having a big kaboom. I wanted to be quiet about it. I didn't want to share it. I didn't want to burden. And I was just like, I can handle this. I felt physically my worst self, pains in my body. I definitely was not physically my healthiest. So I totally relate with that. And once I shifted my perspective and took me out of the power role, I noticed a difference. I started feeling better. I started focusing on things that were intended for me to focus on, as opposed to me just wallowing in my own misery, extending my faith and remembering that Jesus ultimately can make the biggest change if you let him.
Well, I just think about going back to that historical cultural context, the intrigue of the court and the political power and everybody wanting to keep their power. Her husband, there's a question, they think he was Nabatean, which isn't Jewish.
Right.
So was there pressure of him feeling like he has to prove himself in order to keep his position? And that's the world that Joanna lived in. And so it's really easy. It's not a stretch to imagine it made her sick.
Yeah.
And then the question of was she even practicing her faith at that point? We don't know. And so we just know from that one sentence that you had to work with, she was sick in body and in spirit.
So, Anita, what do you want our listeners to know about what Jesus did for her?
Well, the first thing is that he healed her of whatever was ailing her. It caused her to feel immense gratitude. And in that gratitude, she was able to renew her purpose, to take what gifts she had, whether it be money or she had connections or she had sewing, whatever her skill was, whatever her blessing that she had, but she was able to take that and use that to the good and service of the disciples and Jesus.
That brings to mind the scripture where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. So he set her free from physical, spiritual, and emotional sickness, whatever that was. And so
Right.
I love the thought that that's still open to us today.
What did you learn about God?
Other than forgiveness is amazing and it's powerful, and healing and restoring yourself and finding who you're meant to be and how you're meant to be, I think is ultimately, it kind of just like it shakes off the dust of life. You can impact the world differently because you view it differently. You can look at the parts that are dirty and you can say, I don't have to be part of this. Where can I help? And I think you don't have to focus on the negative anymore. You can say, though, that's going on over there, but I can find something over here that's within my talents, my skills. I have extra money that I can provide for someone, that I can impact someone positively, and I don't have to contribute to the negative space that's happening on a daily basis.
So, Anita, now that we've talked about Joanna and where she was coming from and what Jesus did for her, and then her response to that, how do you see her story applying to our audience? And what is a practical takeaway that our listeners and us can put into practice?
I think the one thing I want to touch on is that faith and works, right? We have this conversation about faith and works a lot. About people say, well, I'm doing good deeds, I'm doing good deeds. So look at me. Okay, but then what is your faith saying about that? Your faith is like, I'm doing this because of my faith, or I'm doing this because this is what I feel I want to do. So why are you doing that? That is the question. And so we think practically, well, I'm doing it because it says I'm supposed to do good things. No, you'll do the good things because of that faith. I think it can cross the spectrum of what that looks like. It could be you're a teacher and you notice a kid in the classroom needs a little bit extra help, you provide a coat, maybe their family, whatever that looks like for that person, or you're an attorney and you have extra money in your bank account to provide free service for someone who doesn't have the ability to access an attorney. Whatever that looks like, wherever you are in your life, you can take your skill, your knowledge, your talent, and provide it to someone. Whatever it looks like, it's very simple, but I think it's why you're doing it because you feel compelled, you feel like you want to, it's fulfilling and it's at a greater service than to just yourself.
I like how you said it in the chapter. It's kind of an overflow, an outflow of gratitude from being forgiven or being saved or being healed from what you were before. And these
Right.
all these things that you're doing practically to give back is just an overflow from that.
I always go back to time, talent, treasure. So the time, whether it's on a Sunday or a community nonprofit, even going and serving walking dogs one day a week, something like that. So your time, talent, like you mentioned before, whatever skills that you have, and of course, financially, if you're able to support a nonprofit in your community. But then there's also simple little things like having purses or bags filled with feminine products or wet wipes, things like that, granola bars, whatever.
have something like that in your car. And if you see someone in need, just hand them a bag. Sometimes we try to overcomplicate it, but really, Jesus, he just needs our willing heart.
I like that. Joanna just took what was in her hand. She had money, she had affluence. So she was able, we don't know that about Susanna or about Mary Magdalene. So she just took what was in her hand and she just did out of her gratitude. I'd like to kind of revisit that as a second thing is that's practical is shifting that mindset of when you've been set free for something, taking a moment to consider the gravity of it. I think as a culture, we're so quick to move on to the next thing. Okay, I feel better, or I have a new perspective, or I'm healed from this trauma. What's the next thing? Really, we have a sign over our bedroom door as we're going out, and it says, "Meet each day with gratitude." And it's a reminder to my husband and I to practice gratitude because it's really easy not to right now in the world that we're living in. It's really easy to focus on the negative and focus on the craziness that's going on around us. But if we stop in gratitude and recognize the gifts we've been given, whether it's financial or just having children or having our animals, or let's talk a little bit about like how do you practice gratitude practically? Like one of the things that I do is an intentional mindfulness or in prayer and just say thank you back to God. And me sitting down to list off all the things that I'm grateful for seems to shift everything in my head and it puts me in a way better place to start my day. Do either of you have a different way to like experience or practice gratitude?
I do have a journal. I'm one of these people, like I have to have all the tools, not that you need the tools to have a relationship with God, but sometimes you have to go through the ritual of it. So sometimes I don't use anything, and sometimes I need like the stack of my journal where I just write things out to process it and get it out. But then I have a journal that is just specifically for gratitude. And I try to do, even if it's just bullet points, and sometimes it's reframing. So if I have a really rough day, sometimes it may just be, thank you, God, for my job that allows me to pay my bills. And sometimes you may have to reframe it if you're struggling with the coworker or the manager or whatever the case may be. So
I literally have to mirror that statement and work very hard to reframe circumstances when they don't seem to fall how I feel they should fall. So if I'm driving late from work and I'm like, why am I late? I'm aggravated, frustrated. I think, well, thank you, because maybe something else was going to happen had I left at the time I was supposed to. So I look at that in a moment. I go, geez, why would I be agitated about something that may have been a blessing in disguise, so to speak? People say the phrase, I have to go to work. I reframe that and say, I get to go to work. And so thinking about Joanna, she got to be able to witness, Jesus and his ministry, despite having this very limited, maybe restrictive lifestyle at home. Her salvation, her renewal spirit allowed her to translate that into what she got to do, how she got to expound upon her purpose.
Thank you for joining us. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Daughter and Joanna Chuza. So drop us a line in the comments, or for a larger discussion on social media, our links are in the show notes below. Is there someone who would be blessed by Daughter or Joanna's stories or the discussion? Take a moment to share it with her.
Join us next time as we dive into the women disciples we explore in our soon-to-be released book, The Other Disciples, with a woman who has less known about her than Joanna, but there is a ton to learn from her, Susanna, and a very well-known woman, but there are a few new ways to consider her, Mary of Nazareth. And remember, stay
curious and keep seeking.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Also Called provides a space for honest conversations about the truth of who God is, who we are, and the relationships He wants us to have with Him, each other, the church, and ourselves. This episode was just the start of the conversation. Be sure to check the show notes for extra resources to go further. You can also find our social media sites to join the discussion. Don't miss our next chat by subscribing to our YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Also Called is part of Bible and Pop Culture, a crowd-funded nonprofit that allows us to provide our content to start great conversations for free. You can help us keep doing this by checking out BibleandPopCulture.com or also called.org's Donate Subscribe buttons with a one-time gift, supporting us monthly, or sharing us with someone who might like the conversation. Thank you for being a part, and see you next conversation.